This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 118. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Well, welcome back to another episode of Your Anxiety Toolkit. I am so excited to share with you today an additional episode with the amazing Stephen Hayes. Stephen Hayes has written an amazing book. It has just come out on Amazon or wherever you buy books, called A Liberated Mind, How to Pivot Towards What Matters. And this book is so good. One of my absolute favorite books that I recommend to clients. It's an actual workbook and it's called Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. Now, it's a really clinical-based book and a skills-based book, but A Liberated Mind is a book that you could gift to just about anybody, and they would take so many amazing, important topics and skills and concepts away with them. So I am so thrilled to share with you Stephen Hayes and his upcoming book and some amazing points that he brings and discusses in today's episode. So before we move over to that, I wanted to do the I Did a Hard Thing segment. This one is very cool. I want you to listen. Okay, here we go. I've decided not to compare myself and my journey to others. It wasn't an easy decision, but it's been so helpful to meet myself wherever I am in the process of recovery and recognize that there isn't a timeline. Along with that, I made the incredibly difficult decision to go to residential treatment. I am terrified to take this next step in my journey, but I know I can continue to do the hard things, not just for my loved ones, but for myself. Wow, this is such an incredible, I did a hard thing, right? It's such an incredible, brave one. And thank you so much for sharing it, because I do think in order for us sometimes to get the help we need, we do need to stop comparing ourselves to other people and accept exactly where we are and take those leaps. So I hope that for those of you who are listening, you can actually take a ton of inspiration from this, and hopefully it gives you the courage to do the same. So thank you. All right. I'm not going to talk for too much longer because I know you want to hear the episode with Stephen Hayes. So here it is. Have a great day. Well, welcome. I am so excited to have Stephen Hayes here with me and his amazing new book, A Liberated Mind, How to Pivot Towards What Matters. So welcome.
It's good to be back here with you again, Karen.
So good to have you back on. Now, this book, actually, not only is it beautiful to look at, the words inside are beautiful too. Can you share with us a little of why this book was created? What was your hope and intention?
Well, I actually have worked on the book for 11 years, and I'm slow. And there's by far more on the cutting room floor than what's in front of you, even though it's a 440-page book. You know, Get Out of Your Mind, Into Your Life was the first kind of ACT book that really got some cultural attention. You know, in the U.S., went up to number 20 on Amazon, and I beat Harry Potter for one glorious week. And it sold well since. But a couple years later, I thought, you know, really, that's a workbook and that's fine, but there isn't any way to really sort of give that to people where you want them to know about the principles and the processes and so forth, and to think about how this lands in their family or in the culture, and or, you know, what we can be doing as a human community to help our culture become more flexible, a little softer and more values-based and things like that. And I created an outline. I started pitching it to publishers. in 2008. And here it is in 2019, and it's out. And what I wanted to do is I really wanted to tell the personal story. So there's way more about my personal journey, but also the science story of the whole community. But not just that, kind of the think book part of it, of why it's hard to be human and why we're feeding things in the modern world that make it harder, and that we see in our young people anxiety, depression, stress, going up. And it's not, sometimes by almost orders of magnitude. And it's not just because they're learning to check something on a self-report. I mean, it's showing up in things like suicide rates. So you just cannot look at it and say, oh, that's just, no, it's not. This is not just something. This is something that's seriously wrong. Something's going awry. I think we all feel it. When we just interact with our normal world, we feel it. So I wanted to try to bring psychological flexibility into the cultural conversation to maybe help deflect and prevent some of these problems, or catch them early enough that we can redirect when life is going awry. And then beyond that, there's a flip side of all these inflexibility processes that create problems that promote prosperity in people. And life will eventually teach you most of these lessons, but it's way better to learn them earlier on, where you can put your full life energy into a values-based journey and really kind of live the kind of life you yearn to live. Not at the level of form. You don't know how that'll turn out. Things will happen. People get sick. People die. But at the level of storyline, what is this story about? Am I writing a tragedy, or am I writing a hero's journey? That's really up to you. And I think if I can put these science-based processes, the way I say it, the 20% that does the 80%, science filters things out. It makes things more simple. And you find things that are in our wisdom traditions, our spiritual traditions, and our art and literature. Of course, we're not saying, ooh, we made up this wisdom. No, but we're able to simplify it and focus it and put skills into people's hands and heads and hearts, so that when those things are needed, when things fall apart, when things are hard, that we know how to do the healthy things. So that's what I've been trying to do over the 11 years. I've been working on this book intensively for 5 years.
Right. It's beautiful. It's
It
beautiful.
landed just a few days ago. It's out. People can see it. I see you have a copy, and it makes me smile and also kind of wait in anticipation and hope that I was able to do what I set out to do.
Yeah, I think you have. I really do. I agree. I think it's a book I would give to anyone as sort of just a wisdom book, right? Like this is some deep wisdom in this book. So as you're talking, I'm actually recalling a conversation I had with a client this week. And I wasn't planning to do this, but I'd like to pose it as a question to you is,
okay,
with the state of the world, with shootings and fires and global warming and politics, a client came in and we're treating an anxiety disorder, but she just came in and she said, I'm trying to handle this disorder, but the world is so scary right now.
Yeah.
And that isn't a disorder, she said. That's not the disorder. That's just the life that I live and the life that we live in today. And she said, help me.
Yeah.
Help me. I'm not asking for help for my disorder. I need help to learn how to manage the many stresses of life. So can you give your response to that question?
Well, I'd start by validating it, because I think almost all of us with eyes to open and ears to hear with, feel that there's something going awry here, where our processes of cultural healing and cooperation and working together are being torn asunder inside judgment and comparison, exposure to horror, fear of what's new. And there's a theme in there, and it is, in fact, the same processes that are involved, some of the same processes as an anxiety disorder struggle, but now writ large in the culture itself. And so I think we just have created a world in which we're increasingly challenging our ability to be present, to be with our own thoughts and feelings in a way that's more open and flexible, and to focus on what matters. And then out of that, we start doing things with each other. So let me give you an example. If you look at something like the immigrant crisis, it's so multi-leveled, it's so complex, and I'm not going to come in with a particular political solution or something like that. We all know there's issues there, and there's issues of borders and culture and all. I get that. And for us to walk through this as the world becomes more interconnected, as people can move around more, as people can see on their iPhones what's going on anywhere in the world in a matter of minutes and so forth, we have to shift even who do we think of as the we. And we evolved in small bands and groups. So we have a natural kind of concern over strangers, for example. But when something that's happening thousands and thousands of miles away can create global warming problems that are going to eventually, put your house underwater, you can't just sort of say the we we're concerned about is this we right here. The we has to be a bigger we. And so we're now at a point where the we is all of us. And we've never had to do that before. And of course it's hard. But now what happens when you're not able to do that? Well, you have a hard time taking the perspective of others. You have a hard time feeling empathy when you do. If you don't have flexibility skills, you run away when it's hard. And we know what produces objectification and dehumanization. We've done the research. Inside all of the judgments that are out there, I mean, in the US, we had people standing in front of school buses shouting at 4-year-old immigrant children, "Get out," with these horrifying faces to 4-year-olds. I mean, look at what our fears are causing us to do. It's so harsh, and so it's not where we want to be. I don't think that people shouting that's where they wanted to be, but they're drawn into it. And so we found that objectification and dehumanization comes from failure taking perspective, failing to feel empathy, or running away when that's hard. And here's the problem. The modern world will force perspective on you. How? The cameras will show it to you. You can see the face of the Syrian mother as you pan from the bloated body of the 3-year-old who's lying on the beach who fell out of the boat. When they're trying to escape the violence and find a safe place for their families, the camera will focus in. Well, that's a kind of perspective taking. You'll see the tears. That produces a kind of empathy. But if you then say, no, they're other, that's not me, it doesn't touch me, then this natural reaction you have that's all the way down to your mirror neurons gets overwhelmed by the inflexibility of I'm unwilling to feel what I would feel if I felt that that person is a human being like me, and that it could have been my child. I could have been in that boat. And so we objectify and dehumanize rather than hurt. Yeah, but then that creates so much pain, not just for the people around us, but for ourselves. Because we've actually shown that when you judge others, when you climb into, I'm not going to feel that because they're other, those same judgments and that same inflexibility turns back on you. For example, people who have weight problems, who objectify and dehumanize others, ridicule themselves and buy into the self-stigma that the culture invites them to buy into. And it makes it even harder to be whole as a person who has a weight problem and even to deal with the weight problem. So it's not really in our interests to protect the wounds that come in the modern world where we can see pain anywhere and instantly on our iPhones. We can hear the judgment and comparison on our newscasts. And we can, look at the bathrooms of the rich and famous or the Instagram posts of our heroes and see that everybody else is doing better than we are, because we're comparing our insides to their outsides. And that toxic triad, and then these inflexibility skills are producing not just the mental health things we're seeing going up, but the harshness and the culture that we're seeing going up. So we're really kind of allied, and I walk through in A Liberated Mind the data on that, what to do about that, and how we're now putting ACT even into things like helping refugees in Uganda, or helping intertribal violence, or helping people step up to the challenge of the Ebola crisis, and what we're doing that is at a scale that maybe could touch things like global warming and immigration and violence.
Right. So you mentioned before, you said what we need to be is open and flexible.
Yeah.
Can you share what that might look like for somebody?
Well, I think it might mean creating a space to feel. So the client who said to you, yeah, I've got this disorder. Well, parentheses, I don't think that a disorder is the way to talk about it. Processes happen that produce problems or make it harder for us to deal with our problems. And yeah, I guess you can call it a disorder, but we don't need a label stuck on people's foreheads. And by the way, the same process that, leads to anxiety struggles, the person next to you on the bus is, having struggles in their area, might not be anxiety, to be something else. It's this, but, could we create a space in which it's okay for us to feel the anxiety that we feel when we turn on our news and when we see what's going on? And then we could then flip that over and say, what does that suggest I care about? That we could see right inside the pain that we care. Because we hurt where we care. We care where we hurt. It's a hashtag for the book, hashtag we hurt where we care. And if you flip it over, you'll see, even in that conversation, that your client is yearning for a kind of cooperative world where we can work together so that our children's children will have a better world than we have now, and not the hellacious kind of vision that's happening with, maybe even a world where Florida is gone and, we've made the planet unlivable. So that piece, could we open up to that, this emotional part of it, flip it over, find the values? Then could we do the things that bring us into a cooperative relationship with others? And those include perspective taking and empathy. They also include shared values and vulnerabilities. How can we work together in a way that's fair and focused? And in the end of A Liberated Mind, I walk through how we've combined ACT now with Elinor Ostrom's Nobel Prize-winning design principles as to how indigenous peoples work together and have for thousands of years without government intervention, without command and control, or without private ownership, and protected their forests, their lakes, their fisheries, their streams, without the tragedy of the commons, without seeing them all go away, but only if they work together and form cooperative groups. And so we are teaching that. It's in the book, and if people want to see where we're going, if you go to prosocial.world, you'll see how we're combining ACT and Lynn Ostrom's design principles. And that's what we've put in, for example, in the Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone, and are putting into small groups around the world right now very actively. So let's get about the business of using our flexibility skills to show up to the challenges of our personal life, but also our social life, our cultural life. And let's start writing a hero's journey where we're given a mission that's almost beyond our imagination. We don't feel up to it. Our emotions tell us we're too small. We can't do anything. But just like, Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or you name it, you step into, okay, I guess it's my task. And you do that personally when you walk through the hell of an anxiety disorder. We can do that as a culture. And just as in those stories, the reason they touch us so much, the hero finds their values, allies with their friends, finds resources within that they didn't expect, and then by mobilizing and building their behavior around what's really important, they sort of take arms against the sea of troubles that they're facing. And we all feel small. We all feel inadequate when we're challenged in that way, whether it's personally or culturally. But science has distilled it down. There's a small number of things you can do that will put your life on a hero's journey course. And maybe, wouldn't it be cool, put our culture on the same course?
Yeah, so much. Okay, so I'm sure people are listening and loving what you're saying, but wondering in their place in the world how they can become a part of the hero's journey. You want to share a little about what that might look like, the first few steps?
Well, I think for one thing, you have to respectfully decline the invitations of the dictator within to turn your life into a problem to be solved instead of a process to be experienced. We're dealing with an evolutionary mismatch. And the reason why it's getting worse is the same organ that is creating that mismatch and creating the challenges also creates the science and technological advances. So what I start out A Liberated Mind with is this amazing paradox that if you had to pick up time to be born, but you couldn't pick where in the world, but only, or to whom, but only when, you couldn't do a better job than pick now. Because around the world, we're doing better. People live longer. They starve less. Violence is down. I know it seems horrible when you look at it, you say violence is up. No, it's not. It's down. Starvation is down. Prosperity is up everywhere you look, except the behavioral and psychological side. There, everything's going in the wrong direction. And I think it's because science and technology has now challenged us with constant exposure to pain, constant exposure to judgment, and constant exposure to comparison. And that's a toxic triad. So we better create modern minds for the modern world. So start with yourself. I'm thinking of the Beatles songs and so forth. You want to free the world, free your mind instead. You got to start with yourself. A liberated mind is really, really important. And we know something about how to liberate our minds from just this problem-solving, judgmental, wagging finger of shame and blame thing that most of us live with, for many hours of the day. Find a way to put that part of your mind on a leash. Use it when it's useful, when you're doing your taxes, when you're trying to figure out how to fix your car, when you're making investments. There's lots of places when you're inventing technology. Look around you right now, and there's almost nothing you can see that would be there without the product of that problem-solving mode of mind. And yet, if you don't know how to bring another mode of mind in, if you see a sunset tonight and you don't know how to, and it's beautiful, and you don't know how to say, wow, period, instead of, God, it needs more blue, or that cloud is misshapen. You have to have the capacity for wow, not just positive, negative too. If you met the mother of that 3-year-old who fell out of the boat in the one I'm talking about, who was escaping Syria, my guess is you'd look at her face and you'd say, wow. And you would know not to say, gee, you're bumming me out by crying so much. Could you, have a happier face? It's bringing me down. You wouldn't do that. So we have to bring this other mode of mind to ourselves and to the world, and create modern minds for this modern world that allow us to take the energy that's inside the things we're doing that are creating problems, that are not bad energies. We're yearning for coherence. We're yearning for knowing where we are, for being able to feel, for being able to have things that are meaningful to build our competence. We're yearning for belonging. Can we take those yearnings, and instead of putting on a clown suit so that we belong, or suppressing our emotions so that we can feel, or worrying and ruminating so we know where we are, or all these mistakes that happen when this new thing, this evolutionary new kid on the block called symbolic thinking shows up, and instead bring in a wiser part of us that is more whole. Some of it's beyond language. It's more intuitive. It's nonverbal. And it includes verbal things like wow, like just observing, describing, and appreciating. That's a really good use of language. It isn't all criticism and figuring out, and my life can start when I figure out how to subtract this or eliminate that. And meanwhile, the clock starts mocking you because your life has already started. You can hear it with every tick, and you're not going to live forever. Well, what are you going to be up to? So I think that's the challenge, is how to show up and get moving inside a world that tells us that can only start when we learn how to run away, delete, subtract, eliminate. And there's no delete button in the nervous system. That's not the kind of creatures we are.
No, not at all. What role would you say values, and I would even love if you could, what values propel you? So you can kind of give a personal example so people A lot of people get really stuck on the values conversation because they haven't yet identified theirs.
Yes.
Would you share yours?
Well, I will. But in terms of identifying, part of what happens is people try to think, they overthink this. They get mindy about it. And it's not by accident. The same root word of the word values is there in evaluate. And so next thing you know, you think you can only get the right values, the true values, the correct values, and you get them by evaluating. No, that's not what happens. This is a different thing. It's this chosen qualities of being and doing that you hold so lightly, but you pursue passionately. And the 4 ways in that I know of, one I've mentioned, take your pain and flip it over. What does that suggest you care about? Another one is think of something really sweet, really uplifting in domains that you're interested in. Values are, different ones in different domains. Walk inside that sweet moment, and I bet you find something in there that will be of use to you in terms of the qualities of your action that you would like to put in the world. Another one is, who are your heroes? Who are your guides? Take an area where it's difficult. If you could, picture somebody who could really be a guide to you or is a hero in this area, and then allow how that person carries themselves and what they stand for to you, to inform a little bit of, isn't that true that some reason you hold them as a hero, you see them as a guide, is that there's something about the way they handle themselves that you want to emulate, that you want in your behavior. Yeah. And you'll find your grandmother there, or your coach, or a therapist you had, or a sibling, or a lover, or a friend, or a spouse, or a spiritual leader, whatever. And then the 4th one is, if you're writing your story and you can't decide necessarily the characters or the events, because you don't know, you might get an email after our conversation here that somebody you dearly love has a serious illness. We're just seconds away from things like that. You can't decide the events, but you can decide, I think you can choose, what is the arc of this story? What kind of story are you writing? And in this next chapter, essentially, what's the theme? Is this a tragedy you're writing? Or is this one where this is where you stepped into those challenges and did things that your whole of you suggested were healthy? I've actually, in the book, A Liberated Mind, I walked through these personal stories myself inside my own anxiety disorder, my struggle with panic, and where it led me to, because I originally didn't see, early days, I could see immediately what happened when I really made that leap into, you can't make me run from my own experience. And I could feel the fog lift in a matter of minutes. I really knew something powerful had happened. And if you go to look at my first TEDx talk, people can find it easily by putting in TEDx and my name. You'll see it. But a few years later, I discovered suppressed memories of domestic violence and found myself underneath my bed at 8 years old, wanting to go out and get in between my mom and dad when they were threatening literally to hit each other, with my dad being drunk and my mom being very frustrated with his spending our meager funds on his addiction. And instead realizing that was not safe. I could not do that. I'd seen my brother try to do it, and he was 11 and he almost got hit. So I just slid back under the bed, but I slid back under right after these words showed up in my mind very, very, very clearly, almost like I said them out loud. I'm going to do something. That's what was in my mind. And I realized there was nothing safe to do. And my panic disorder was all around that when I opened up to that, because it was started inside a horrific department meeting when these old bulls were fighting, and I wanted to make it stop. It reminded me very much of what had gone on in my own home, but I'd kind of forgotten that. I could have said that my dad sometimes threatened to hit my mom and stuff, but I'd really forgotten how powerful that was. And when I found that, my whole life had a different quality, because, I've spent my life trying to do something. And A Liberated Mind, I walk through the science story of it, of how that started, how that little 8-year-old, found that, I couldn't save my mom and dad from the demons within, lovely, loving people, by the way, not to be judged. They just didn't know how to get out of their own way, And I couldn't do it for them, but I can do it for others. And maybe using science, we can come up with principles that will go forward. And it's built into a worldwide community. And it's not one like where you have to know the ritual and get a tattoo and have the high signs and pay money to the founder and all that kind of stuff. The community is about, let's push Western science into human complexity and try to simplify it in such a way that we can get down to the principles that liberate people or that tie people down. And we think we've done that. We think we have a good set. It's not the final answer, but it's a partial answer, and it can be followed out in a step-by-step way and built on. So I've been spending my last 40 years doing something. And if you read the book, you'll see what I've been doing. But not just me. You'll find that a lot of what I've been doing is connecting to the hearts of others who have a similar yearning for a similar journey. And together we've created something. I mean, there's 3,300 studies on ACT and the flexibility model and relational frame theory. And, I have not even looked at the titles of all of them, but there's thousands of people out there. So there's a we that is working on that. And the 8-year-old's kind of pleased with that.
I'm so pleased that it is happening that way, because it is, that's the hero. You're the hero. You've created a hero's journey.
Well, I think I've empowered some folks on that hero's journey, and people have stepped up. They've worked so hard, they keep innovating. They keep pushing me and pushing each other and doing it in a way. If you come to an ACBS conference, the group that does that kind of work, there's a quality to it because the people are compassionate and caring and accepting and non-judgmental and values-based in their own life, because you can't do this work well without applying it to yourself. So the book will be of use to therapists for sure, but it's I think of special use to therapists as people. And then out of that, maybe being useful to others and the people that they love and also the people that they serve professionally.
Right. I love it. I can't tell you how many times when we get stuck in a session with my clients, and I know I've even had these conversations with my kids and my family, when we're stuck on what to do next, knowing values is always a direction, right? When you feel so stuck, you feel like you can't come, you're just so overwhelmed, you can't come up with a solution. The values piece always gets us started again, like back on track. Would you agree with that?
Well, I do, although to really do values well, you have to have that emotional openness because we care. You got to have a little bit of diffusion skills because you're making a choice. You're not just following the dictator within. You could wag a finger at it and say, you have to value this, or you should value that, or you should feel guilty if you don't care about that, or mama won't be pleased if you don't care about this. And all of that stuff doesn't predict any positive behavior. When you actually take measures of it, if that's why you care, you don't care. This has to be between you and the person in the mirror. It doesn't mean your values are individualistic. It can be cultural, it can be religious, it can be communitarian to the max, but you own it. This is your life in connection with others. And as we spin around, values has to kind of fit the moment. Well, what's going on inside and out? You got to have attentional skills even to see the opportunities, and you got to have the competence skills to put your values choices into your actual behavior. So they all fit together. But I agree with you that where the rubber meets the road is values. But one of the things I've shown or found, and I do this in workshops and stuff with therapists, is that I almost think you can sometimes just randomly spin it. And especially in this book, I get into the underlying yearnings underneath inflexibility and how they are actually satisfied by flexibility. And when you open up to that, if you're right in one of those conversations with a difficult one with your kids or in a family or a situation or something, you could almost spin the dial and say, not say out loud, but kind of mentally, what else could I do here? Like, for example, if it hits on the perspective taking dial, you might really settle down and ask your child how that seems to them. Or have you ever been in a situation where there's another way forward here that would really That's perspective taking. You're asking your child to take perspective. Or if you spin it and it landed, let's say, on emotion, maybe in that moment you just share a little bit about how you feel. And some of it might, but careful, not in a way to manipulate or judge. It has to be true. But it might include, things that are, like, it's really painful to hear that. Things that your child might not expect of you if you did it really straight ahead. It might slow down if we're in that kind of, but I agree with you. Values are where the rubber meets the road. I'm just entertained by the fact and kind of uplifted by the fact that you can almost randomly go to these flexibility sets and you have an angle in, because all roads lead to Rome anyway. We actually show this in the measures. They all fit together. It's like 6 sides of a box. Flexibility is one box and has 6 sides, but they fit together more powerfully when they're in alliance with each other. And I have seen values overused, especially if you don't work on the diffusion part, because then it's sort of like, well, don't you care about what you value? What's the matter with you? Well, next thing you know, you're like wagging a finger at people about their values. You go like, oh, make it stop. That's not what that conversation is really about. A real values conversation is right at the edge of that bittersweet quality of tears and laughter, of smiling and weeping. It's like a marriage ceremony or a child being born. I mean, you naturally know, and you just look, people start crying, they're laughing, they're smiling, because you're right on that edge where it's of importance by choice. And the emotional quality of that is not what your mind tells you. It isn't necessarily even just happy. It could be poignant. It can even bring tears to your eyes, but they're not tears of sadness, tears of vulnerability and of the bittersweet quality of life mattering, of people mattering.
I sort of want to end with more of a bigger picture from your personal opinion of why does it matter? What do you see? What richness do you see? Tell me about what your thoughts are.
Well, I think even in the question is a little bit of a seed of a problem, because I would deny that it matters. What I would say is you matter about it. And, the science has given us information that makes it harder and harder because, for example, that either there's enough dark matter that the speeding, accelerating, expanding universe will eventually slow and collapse back to an infinitely dense P from which the Big Bang will happen and it'll do another round, or there's not enough dark matter and it will expand infinitely but gradually go dark until all energy is lost and it's a dark nothing. Does either of those sound especially meaningful to you? So what are we going to run out of the room when the physicists start talking? Go, don't tell me, don't tell me, don't tell me. You can't do that, dude. Science is walking us into a place where we get to know things that we didn't have to know before. And yeah, we had to know that we're going to die, for example. That was always a challenge. But to actually know that, maybe even everything does or not, well, yes. But if I could tell a personal story, my son came to me, who's now just turning 31. In fact, he just had his birthday. He's 31. My eldest son. My oldest is 50. My youngest is 14. I've had kids in the home for 55 years when little Stevie goes to college. But takes multiple wives to do this. But anyway, my son came to me. I forget the exact age, 10, 11, 12. And he's saying, Dad, seems to me it's just meaningless. And he starts talking to me about things like the expansion of the universe and stuff like that. And he says, why shouldn't I kill myself? It doesn't mean anything. I said, I did something that kind of surprised him. I said, why don't we just go with that? Let's just go with it. Okay, suppose your mind's right. It's all meaningless. It's just empty. In the end, it's a big ice ball. And he kind of looks at me with horror, like, what? I expected you to argue my way out of this, not to throw me into the deep end of the pool. There's a little pause, and I look at him and I say, but I just want to add one little thing. I know that you love me, and I know that you know that I love you. That's true too. And no matter what your mind says about it, that's worth our attention. And he told me later it was a turning point in his life. Because what I was inviting him to do was to care by choice, to stand in front of the nothing that your mind will give you and declare, I care. Why? Because we do.
Right.
Sue me if you don't like it. You can't make me not care. And our attempts to make ourselves not care is killing us. We found this. It's not just experiential avoidance. It's not just, I'm running away from pain. No. If you take experiential avoidance and you follow its trajectory over life, you run away from joy too. The bigger you are, the harder you fall. It's going to end. If somebody looks you in the eye and says, I love you, part of you is saying, you almost want to detune yourself from that moment. Yeah. What if I'm being lied to? What if he dies? What if it goes away? And of course, you have a history where it's happened. You've been betrayed in the past. You've been lied to in the past. You with me on this? So if you're not open to pain, you can't be open to love. Can't. And so could we create a place where it's okay for us to be who we actually are? We're the creatures who by birth yearn to belong. If you have a neonate, brand new baby born and you lock eyes with them, their brain starts dumping natural opiates. Why? Because we come into the world wanting to belong. That's the kind of monkey we are.
Right. Yeah. Even his question in and of itself was showing how much he cared.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think we need pretty wise modern minds to be able to walk into this now with science and technology challenging us, but also undermining some of our wisdom traditions and spiritual traditions and social. Bowling alone, our church this is down and stuff. We have to find ways to reach the human heart inside this modern world and uplift us to be able to be the caring, cooperative, loving creatures that we are, that yes, at the worst becomes the narcissistic, violent, disturbed creatures we can come to be, but that wasn't the story that had to be written. And that's not even the story that the people who were writing that wanted to write. They just didn't see another way out. Can we put it in the culture so that folks can not find another way out, but find a way in?
Right. I love it. I'm so grateful that you were willing to, that's big stuff at the end, of really talking about why it matters or if it matters. So Thank you. I'm so grateful for your time. All of what we talked about, I know, is in A Liberated Mind.
It is indeed. It's exactly what that book's about.
Where can we find your book?
Well, it's everywhere now, and of course, all the online things, and it's doing very well. So it's in all the retailers too, and we'll see. But around the world, if people are seeing this outside of the UK and environs or the US, 18 different translations are coming, and they'll take a little time. So eventually, it'll be worldwide, and people will be able to get it in their own language for most of the language communities out there. But right now, it's available and you can get it in a matter of days. And I hope you do, and let me know how it lands. If people actually want to get, if I can mention, there's some really cool freebies, including a book that my second daughter, my 28-year-old, who's a wonderful artist, drew on Act in a Nutshell, that has these awesome images of the dictator within and all the flexibility process. It's only 12 pages, but the images are beautiful. And there's also a video from me and a toolkit thing of things you can do, little micro things you can do that will help you. If they go to my website, which is stephenchayes.com, and just /a-liberated-mind, all lowercase, there, if they buy the book, they can upload a receipt. Several hundred people have already done it, and we'll give them all the freebies. And they're really, really neat.
I cannot wait to see that.
Book is awesome.
Yeah, the visuals, I think, are so helpful for people. Oh, that's so great. Okay, so I'll definitely link that, and that will be great for people to get. and see. I think you need an actual game, don't you? You should be making a game for kids or adults, like that
Some people
spinner.
have. There actually are act games. Yes, there
Oh,
are. And there's ones being tested that are video games that are really awesome. The Finns, for example, Raimo Lapinlainen in Finland, has this beautiful, well-crafted, well-funded. I mean, it's as good as any game you've ever seen on your little iPad or whatever. And it's an act game.
no kidding. That's
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
cool. All right.
So I think that world is coming, and it's not just us. If people want to see a beautiful, beautiful song, go to the Stevens Universe site. It's a really popular cartoons show, or just Google "Here Comes a Thought."
I love that video.
Yes, don't you? And the person who wrote it, I'm blocking on her last name. It's something Sugar, is an act reader, and the lyrics, flexibility, love, and trust. I mean, it's right out of act writings. And in the web page for the cartoon stuff, they tell a little bit of story as to, in that episode, Steven, the little hero, actually wears a bald wig. And the rumor is they were doing it as a shout out to the old man. Hello.
That's awesome. I love that video. Actually, a teen client of mine, I was sharing with them about ACT, and she goes, this is kind of like Steven Universe. And she brought it up on her phone, and I was like, that's exactly it.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing, what's happening is not just ACT. There's other folks chasing these flexibility processes, the mindfulness-based folks and the metacognitive folks and all of that. But we're starting to put it in the culture. And the people who are really early adopters are the artists and the book writers, because they've always been about that. They've been talking about these things from the beginning, and they are taking the science and they're putting it out in the form of stories and music and images. And I think that's kind of awesome to see that the culture has different ways of moving people. It isn't just news programs with all of their shoutcasts instead of newscasts and all of that. Maybe we can move ourselves in the right direction using science, but in ways that have all the channels available to us, from a song and a cartoon show to an illustrated act in a nutshell book.
I love it. And an app. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I wish you all the luck. Thank you from me, and I know our community, for writing this book. I think it's going to be incredible.
Thank you. It was awesome having some time with you again, Kim.
Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.